Thank you, Halima, for that really great interview. And Mustafa, thank you for joining us. I want to encourage everyone to read Halima's essay in the Global Energy Agenda. Her essay looks at the OPEC Plus agreement over the past year and what it pretends going forward. You can read the Global Energy Agenda on the Atlantic Council website, and you can also find it on the conference app. Now we're going to pivot to the second of our three panels on the future of nuclear power. One of the key ideas we've heard throughout this year's Global Energy Forum is the need for innovation to develop and deploy energy technologies that are cleaner and more sustainable. One of the top opportunities in this space is nuclear energy, especially because the technology exists at scale already, and advanced nuclear technologies hold the promise of making nuclear even safer and more accessible to a wider range of countries that are seeking to decarbonize. I am delighted to introduce our next moderator for the panel, Nuclear Innovation, Projections for the Next Decade, Jackie Kempfer, who's a senior policy advisor at Third Way's Climate and Energy Program, and also a non-resident senior fellow at our Global Energy Center. She'll be moderating this panel with some of the leading nuclear technology and policy experts in North America. Jackie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Excited to be here, Andy.
Jackie, before we get started with the panel, I wanted to ask you a question. Given the change in the administration today, I wanted to discuss what the future of nuclear power might look like in the Biden administration. The Trump administration was quite supportive of nuclear, but at least some of the Democratic presidential candidates called for the end of nuclear power in the US. Where do you think Biden will fall?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about this. I think a lot of us were extremely excited to see that as part of President Biden's Build Back Better plan, he has included the ambitious goal of completely eliminating carbon pollution from our power sector by 2035. And he's made a clear and consistent commitment to using nuclear energy technologies to meet his decarbonization goals. Be it in his climate plan, in the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force on climate change recommendations, or in the National Party platform, President Biden has shown repeatedly that he understands nuclear is crucial to achieving economy-wide net zero emissions. And as an early supporter of President Biden at Third Way, we've seen consistent support, particularly relevant to our conversation today, for the continued development and ultimate deployment of advanced nuclear energy. And so we're thrilled to see the team of climate experts in place at the White House that have been announced over the past several days, and are really excited and confident to see the president fulfill the pledge to take a technology neutral approach to solving the climate emergency.
Yeah. Do you think that there'll still be bipartisan interest in nuclear on the Hill, particularly now that the Democrats are in charge? Do you see that as a continued place for real climate action, or do you think that some that are still opposed to nuclear will end up dominating the conversation?
I think it's absolutely going to remain really a bipartisan bright spot that we've seen on climate action over the past 4 to 8 years. Throughout what's been consistently a very divided Congress, the support for, especially for the development of advanced nuclear technologies, has remained consistent, with several different pieces of legislation passed with robust bipartisan support over the past few years. I do note that I think as we've sort of moved into a new phase of support for nuclear technologies as part of addressing climate change, I think we will see in the next few years certain issues come to the surface that, to be quite frank, have needed to be discussed more, especially in Congress. There are many Democrats that are supportive of nuclear technologies to address climate change, but they also want to see meaningful conversations about how we're going to address ultimate storage of nuclear waste, and also environmental justice concerns, and making sure that we're being thoughtful in the way that the nuclear energy community engages with the public, and especially potential communities where we will site some of these new reactors. So I think that there's absolutely opportunities for continued bipartisan support as we move forward, as well as opportunities to tackle some of the issues that have sort of remained peripheral up until now.
So, Jackie, that's fantastic, and it does seem like there's a real moment right now where you can harness this bipartisan support and address those hard issues that might have been holding nuclear back for the past few years. We also have the opportunity for any number of new advanced nuclear technologies, which I know you're going to talk about right now. So over to you and your panel so that we can learn more about what the next decade might bring in advanced nuclear.
Great, thank you so much. So first, I want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us today. And I do want to take a brief moment to acknowledge and thank the Atlantic Council for their Herculean efforts to transform this annual gathering and successfully providing the opportunity for us all to come together, even under these extraordinary circumstances. We're here today to talk about nuclear innovation and what may unfold in the decade ahead. This is an important framing as the next decade will likely be transformative in building the foundation for a global energy transformation. This is also the time frame when utilities, manufacturers, and countries across the world will be looking for the zero carbon assets they will deploy for the next 20 years and beyond. While the pandemic and global economic crisis are causing a temporary lull in energy consumption, long-term energy demand will increase substantially, particularly in emerging markets. Mature economies will also need to add a significant amount of new power generating resources to the grid in the coming decades to replace coal plants and aging clean nuclear plants. The world must meet as much of this global demand with carbon-free power as possible and avoid relying on high-emitting coal and gas plants to fill this need. There is a narrow window of opportunity to advance climate efforts, and we must be ready with all of the clean energy technologies we can get our hands on. Now, while we've made incredible strides over the last decade in clean energy technologies, we haven't come close to reaching the level of innovation needed to truly confront climate change. To do so, we will need breakthroughs in storage, advanced geothermal, carbon capture, and advanced nuclear energy. Just as the original prototypes do not resemble today's solar panels and wind turbines, tomorrow's nuclear looks very different from the plants of today. The next generation of nuclear power promises to be more cost-effective and safer than ever. Over the last 5 years, advanced reactors have progressed far more rapidly than anyone predicted. And over the next 10 years, we will see the construction and operation of multiple first-of-a-kind advanced nuclear technologies and the development of a global supply chain to support them. But where there is progress and opportunity, there remain challenges that must be addressed in order to set the world on a path to a safe and secure advanced nuclear age. Now, we have an hour to cover the scope of challenges, opportunities, and progress we are likely to see over the next 10 years. That is a tall order. We are lucky to have an esteemed panel of experts that bring an excellent variety of expertise and perspectives from across the nuclear ecosystem. So now, I am delighted to introduce our panel. Please welcome Caroline Cochran, the co-founder and CEO of Oklo, Chris Levesque, the president and CEO of TerraPower, Daniel Poneman, the president and CEO of Centrus Energy Corporation, and Rumina Velshi, the president and CEO of the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. Thank you all for being here today. I really look forward to our discussion. To start things off, I want to turn to Chris and Caroline. TerraPower and Oklo have both experienced tremendous progress over the past 2 years. Can each of you talk a bit about your company's reactor designs, the path you each are pursuing towards demonstration and deployment, and what you see as the greatest potential challenges still facing the development of these new technologies? Caroline, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Jackie, and thanks to the Atlantic Council. It's good to be back. I was able to be on a prior episode with the Atlantic Council, and I just really appreciate the forum here to discuss this. Just like we have a lot to cover in this hour, there's a lot to cover in this question that you've asked, Jackie, but I'll start off by saying, yes, there's been a lot going on for our company in the last couple of years. We really started off this decade of the 2020s with a bang. Oklo submitted the first ever advanced fission non-light water reactor license application, combined license application to the NRC. And it was accepted for review, which is actually a pretty high bar. So we're currently in review to get the first operating license for a non-LWR commercially in recent times. So that is huge, and we're very excited and proud of that. What it required was developing a whole new application structure and format and getting the regulator to agree to that. So that took place over the past couple of years. And, you know, one of the exciting things about that too is that Congress has made sure that times spent in application aren't like they were decades ago, potentially lasting many, many years on end. So we expect to see a license for operation in the next few years. So with that license to operate, we can literally build and operate a plant. So that's one of the things we're very excited about. We're already working on our next designs. To tell you a little bit about what we're working on more specifically, it's I basically start off by saying it's different from everything you know about existing nuclear, and that's part of the reason why we use the term advanced fission. We use different fuel, different coolant, or basically no coolant, completely different size and orders of magnitude smaller, different load following characteristics and different waste recycling characteristics. So one of our big missions is actually to turn existing nuclear waste into clean energy. So that's one of our driving missions, in addition to providing clean power to people around the world. So that's definitely something we're really excited about, is our technology, where we're going, and the progress we've made so far. Just to recap, Oklo is the only company right now that's a non-light water reactor, or this kind of advanced fission technology, that has a site use permit from the DOE, has been awarded fuel, and is the application in place. So we've kind of got all the big moving parts in place to really make things happen very rapidly.
That's great. Thanks so much, Caroline. And Chris, would love to hear a bit more about everything that TerraPower is up to and the developments we've seen, and then some challenges that maybe you're still keeping an eye on moving forward into this new decade.
Sure, Jackie. Thanks for running the panel, and thanks Atlantic Council for bringing us together. And you know, Rumina, Dan, Caroline, we see each other rather frequently, as we've you know, all been making the point for the place for advanced nuclear in our energy future. So good to be with you all. I think I need to start by, you know, going back to TerraPower's founding 14 years ago, when Bill Gates started the company with our other founders. You know, the thought was that nuclear science has really been under-harvested to solve the problems we face today. You know, as we all know, nuclear faces different institutional barriers that have slowed us. You know, issues with regulation, issues with public perception. And it's really caused nuclear science to be under-leveraged to solve today's problems. And I think over the course of you know, 14 years at TerraPower, with the other companies represented here, with regulatory reforms that I'm sure Rumina is going to talk about, we are really making a place, not just for resurgence of nuclear energy, but for advanced nuclear energy and nuclear innovation to be leading the way. And I should mention some of that, you know, underutilization of nuclear science wasn't limited just to energy. 6 years ago at TerraPower, we realized, you know, there's a similar problem with nuclear medicine, and we've in fact started a medical isotopes business within TerraPower now. So there's great opportunities here. There's technology here that's available to solve our energy challenges, our climate challenges, and even our health challenges with nuclear science. So you know, now fast forwarding to about 2 years ago, TerraPower was at the point we had been working on our sodium fast reactor for 12 years. It was now at the point where it was ready for demonstration, and we thought the conditions were right to go for this demonstration project in the U.S. We saw the you know, the rising bipartisan support that Jackie, you and Randy were talking about earlier. Saw the progress of things like the Nuclear Energy Leadership Act, and we said, hey, we think we can do this in the U.S. now. So we put together a team. Jay Weilman at GE Hitachi and I, GE Hitachi, as some of you may know, was also working on a sodium fast reactor prism. We said, let's bring our teams together and do 1 + 1 = 3. Let's bring the best aspects of our technologies together, and we did that with and we called it Natrium. Natrium is our sodium fast reactor. It's a 345 megawatt electric plant that's ready for demonstration. Natrium solves all of the Generation 4 challenges. Generation 4 is that next level of advanced nuclear power that companies like Oklo and TerraPower have been striving for years. It involves bringing nuclear energy, which is already so safe, brings it to the next level of safety and economic performance, waste reduction, non-proliferation. So Natrium has all those benefits, but what we did with Natrium that solved a whole new problem was, instead of boiling water with our reactor, as we've done for 60 years with nuclear energy, we said, let's connect the Natrium reactor to a molten salt storage system, much like what's used in concentrated solar plants today. And what that lets us do is operate Natrium on the grid in parallel with a growing penetration of renewables like wind and solar, which are by their nature intermittent. And Natrium can ramp from 345 megawatts to 500 megawatts electric for up to 5 hours. And what we found when we did that, it wasn't done in a vacuum. We did a lot of talking to utilities too. What we were hearing from them was they're committing, due to their sustainability objectives, their boards and other stakeholders are requiring them to decarbonize and to make big investments in wind and solar. And you see this in Germany, in California, and to a growing extent in the US. We're creating a new problem, which is related to the intermittency of wind and solar. For sure, we need to build out massive amounts of wind and solar, but we need to think about how that changes things on the grid. So Natrium, with its energy storage capability, is, like I said, really solving a new problem. It's getting great attention. It's also using nuclear energy in a whole new way. Nuclear energy's typically been baseload power. It's been that cheaper power that's at the bottom of the dispatch curve, running all the time. Well, with Natrium, you can now operate, at the top of the dispatch curve because of that ramping capability. Back to the importance of the government support. So we had this great team with GE Hitachi and Bechtel, and several utility partners have joined us as well in the US. I should mention Energy Northwest, Duke, and Berkshire Hathaway Energy and their subsidiary PacifiCorp. With that team, we know we're ready to demonstrate, but what you need in the US to cross what we call the second valley of death, okay? TerraPower, in our situation, we've crossed that first valley of death with support from our shareholders over 14 years. Now, to build a demonstration plant, we really need a public-private partnership. And I mentioned the Nuclear Energy Leadership Act earlier. NELA is still progressing, but a very important development that came out of that push was the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. And this summer, we competed in the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program, and we won. So we now have launched a 7-year project to build the first Natrium reactor. That demonstration will be at commercial scale. And we're, with the team members I mentioned, we're mobilizing the project now. It's with significant government investment, taxpayer support, but also really serious private investment. And I think that's the right kind of public-private partnership and fair sharing of risk and reward we need if we're going to really move the US into the next phase of nuclear energy. And I'll wrap up by trying to address you asked our biggest challenges. I could go for some time on that, but I'd like to focus on two. One is we need to keep working on the public support and the regulatory support, because nuclear does start with that disadvantage. And I think people more and more are realizing we need to use nuclear science. I mean, is there any other field of science where we say, no, let's leave that in the corner? I don't think so. So we're seeing more and more appreciation for that. So we need to keep working with the public and regulators on our image. And then the last thing I'll mention is these projects will be hard. We shouldn't kid ourselves. Countries, especially in Europe and the U.S., free world countries, have struggled with their new nuclear projects. So the U.S., in fact, is somewhat inexperienced, and that's why this partnership was so important, to bring in folks like Bechtel and GE, Hitachi, the national labs. We really need to make sure we have our A team because this will be hard, and frankly, the U.S. is a bit out of practice. But I'm very encouraged that we have a great team and ready to start.
Thanks, Chris. Before we go to Rumina to hear about all of the developments with SMRs in Canada, I just wanted to go back to Caroline for a brief minute, see if you wanted to add anything to Chris's challenges and sort of things to keep an eye on in the coming years.
Yeah, Jackie, thank you. I realized at the end, I forgot the last part of your question, which is what challenges do we foresee? So thank you for giving me that opportunity. I would highlight two, and it's basically leading out of two main organizations in the United States, agencies in the United States that affect how nuclear power is developed, regulated, and deployed. And that's DOE and NRC. I think the acceptance and the creative work by the NRC on our application, accepting it and looking at something totally differently while still meeting regulatory requirements, shows a lot of great forward progress by the NRC, which is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. But I would also say that, like Chris said, nuclear, in comparison with other clean energy technologies, regardless of inherent safety advances for technologies, for instance, like Oklo's, regardless of being orders of magnitude smaller than existing plants and so forth. Just for an example, we're at our application is for a plant that's 1 megawatt, and existing plants are on the order of 1,000 or 100, at least upper 100. So despite all of that, we are still forced to meet all the same regulations, and so we're inherently at a disadvantage. And I would say, as years go by, and Chris talked about many years, and Oklo is going on several years as well. It's amazing to think, like, can't we just build it? Can't we just build something small, show that it works, have whatever belts and suspenders for safety that we need, and really move forward like that? But it is a lengthy regulatory process that I think, even with all the advances, still can be significantly improved. There's work going on right now that was motivated by Congress, the U.S. Congress, on developing what's called a new Part 53, which is new regulatory set for non-light water reactors. I think that holds both promise and potential major pitfalls. If we try to make it look like what has existed already, we're just going to make it even harder. If we take advantage of making it transformative, I think there could be real promise there. Another challenge I would say is working with DOE. I think it needs to modernize how it works with companies, and flowing out of that, how the national labs work with companies. I've mentioned this before in different fora, but I think there's still things that need to be updated in how they integrate and how they can support companies without just giving money. I think Oklo's model has shown that we can get very far. We've hit three major things: site, application, and fuel, all without any government funding at all. I think we've shown that can happen, but we can't have DOE making things more difficult or challenging as far as working with companies. And I would say, several of those are credit to DOE for the site use permit and for the fuel. But moving forward on those, I think, needs to happen quickly, and programs like ARDP will also prove out that DOE needs to, what Chris was referring to, also needs to move quickly and hopefully demonstrate a new way of working with companies.
Thanks, Caroline. I think we'll definitely, especially in speaking with Dan a bit later, get into some of the potential challenges around fuel supply too. As you mentioned, that is one of the pieces that you've already moved to address with Oklo's reactor. But first, I want to turn to Rumina. Canada recently released a small modular reactor action plan on the development, demonstration, and deployment of SMRs for multiple applications. And I believe you're reviewing your first application for a micro modular reactor. What steps are you taking as a nuclear regulator to be ready for innovation in the nuclear sector, such as small modular reactors in Canada?
Hey, thanks for the question, Jackie. And before I get to the answer, again, I'm really delighted to be here again with the Atlantic Council and with this august group of panelists. So the picture in Canada is not really that different than what has been portrayed by you and Chris and Carolyn in the United States, in that there is growing interest and momentum in nuclear and in SMRs. And the SMR action plan that you referred to is an indication of that. It got released in December of last year, and it is a Pan-Canada action plan on a roadmap actually that was developed a year ago, and how that roadmap has now been operationalized. So it's an action plan that sees the deployment of SMRs, the larger SMRs, by the late 2020s. And within the action plan, there are like over 100, I think that's 109 participants that include different levels of government. It includes proponents like Chris and Carolyn. It includes power utilities, includes the regulator. It includes our Indigenous communities, civil society organizations, labs, academia. All those who would be interested in SMRs are part of this action plan. So it's a very inclusive plan in an integrated way of how we want to develop and deploy SMRs. And so from a regulator's perspective, and I know my co-panelists have heard me say this a number of times, as a regulator, as I say over and over again, our role is not to, our role is to protect Canadians from risk. It's not to protect them from progress and innovation. And the CNSC, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, we have made it our priority to be in a state of readiness to regulate SMRs and not to be an unnecessary impediment. So some of the specific actions that we have taken, and it's kind of interesting to see that both Carolyn and Chris have identified the regulator as one of the biggest challenges that exists out there. So let me share with you what we in Canada have been doing to get ready and are ready to regulate SMRs. As you said, we already have an application for a demonstration microreactor, and are expecting our first application for a large size reactor, a 300 megawatt reactor in early 2022. So the first thing is people. We've been, over the last few years, have been building capacity. We've got a renewal initiative that has been underway, partly as a result of our demographics, in the nuclear sector. There are many of the same vintage as me. So to bring in new blood, but also new expertise, and making sure that the knowledge from the veterans gets transferred to the new folks. So that's been happening for some time. The second service that we at the CNSC offer is a vendor design review process. And sadly, neither Terra or Oklo are part of that VDR process, because I would have loved to have heard your perspective on that. But this review process is to allow proponents, and right now we've got 12 different proponents going through our vendor design review process. It's a pre-licensing process. And its objective is to give proponents an opportunity to learn about the Canadian regulatory framework and the regulator's expectations. And all 12 vendors that we have now are new to Canada. Canada has only got CANDO technology that's deployed right now, and they're all new to that. So it's an opportunity to learn how the Canadian regulatory framework works. It's a little different than the US NRC. And it's also an opportunity for them to hear what the regulators concerns are, issues are, and if there are any showstoppers in their design, it's an early warning of that. And then from our perspective as the regulator, it's an opportunity for us to learn about these new technologies and truncate our very steep learning curve. Again, as I said, we're experts on can-do technology. All these new technologies are very novel for us. So the VDR process allows us both to get to understand the technologies and each other's expectations. The third thing we've done and are doing is reviewing our regulatory framework. So our regulations, our requirements, they have all been developed with our experience with can-do technology. So the one thing we have been doing is to make sure that our requirements are technology neutral. The second one is that, and for our nuclear power plants, our requirements are very much outcome performance-based. They're not prescriptive. Again, something a little different from the US NRC. But there are certain aspects of our business where we are unnecessarily prescriptive. Security requirements is one such area. So we're modifying our requirements to make it, as I said, more performance-based, which allows the proponents to come to us with a safety case. It gives them more flexibility on how they're going to meet our requirements rather than us dictating on how that should happen. And the third one, very, very critical, and we've heard that from both Carolyn and Chris, is to make sure our requirements are risk-informed, that the requirements are commensurate with the risks that's posed. These are new designs. Great safety systems, passive systems, a lot smaller, and some requirements simply don't make sense with these new technologies. And so we have been revamping our regulatory requirements, refining them, and again, that's work in progress. And last year, or actually it's now the year before, we had the International Atomic Energy Agency do a regulatory review of Canada, and it was a good practice that they gave us for our regulatory framework for new technologies and our ability to adapt for that and readiness for that. The fourth thing we have done, and I've been a very strong proponent of that, is around international collaboration, which frankly I believe is smart regulation. Is none of us have all the answers, and we really want to leverage our expertise. And kudos to my colleague at the US NRC, Chairman Svinicki, had shown remarkable leadership in this area. And so with the US NRC, we signed a memorandum of cooperation in August of 2019, which would allow the two of us, two organizations, to share reviews, our approaches, our requirements, and our expertise. And this would allow for our reviews to be quicker, better, greater outcome, and frankly, hopefully reduce the amount of duplication of efforts required by proponents. And that has worked so well over the last 18 months between Canada and the UK and the US that we've got into a similar arrangement with the UK's regulator, the Office of the Nuclear Regulator, and we signed a memorandum of cooperation with them in October of last year. So that's one thing we have done on international collaboration. The second one is we sit on a multiple number of working groups under the auspices of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the Nuclear Energy Agency, and other fora where we can share best practices with each other. And then in April of last year, I was honored to be appointed as the chair of the Commission of Safety Standards of the International Atomic Energy Agency. That's the body that sets safety standards for the nuclear sector. And with my colleagues there, we have made the establishment of safety standards for SMRs a priority during our term. And so what the IAEA is doing is work similar to what we have done at the CNSC, is looking at the standards framework to say, how technology neutral are they? Do they meet the needs of SMRs? And if there are gaps, how can we close those gaps? And there's some great work happening there. And we're learning from other sectors. You know, there are many other what I call high reliability sectors that have a lot of harmonization already in place. So whether it's the aviation industry, whether it is finance, whether it's pharmaceuticals, and again, under the leadership of Bill Magwood, a shout out to him. He's taken a great leadership role in this area of harmonization or possibilities of harmonization. And in December of last year, the NEA and the CNSC jointly hosted a 5-day workshop on innovation and regulation, where we brought in folks from these other sectors to share their learnings, their challenges for us, because I think some of the best practices are universal. And we're closely monitoring what's happening with the approval of the COVID-19 vaccine, where regulators have shown a great deal of agility in reviewing studies and tests and see what we can learn from that. And our ultimate goal is, can we get to international harmonization of designs, of licensing approaches, and maybe we can get into that a bit later. And the final thing, and again, the same challenge that both Chris and Carolyn spoke about that we as the regulator are working on, is building public trust, confidence, and social acceptance in these new technologies. Part of our mandate as the Canadian regulator is to disseminate objective and scientific information about nuclear matters. And Canada's plans is to deploy or potentially deploy SMRs in areas that have not had nuclear. It could be some of our remote communities in provinces that we don't currently have nuclear. So this is something very new. There are a lot of questions and concerns. And so we've got a very elaborate strategy on how do we try to build greater confidence in the regulator and around the technologies that we're reviewing. So hopefully that's given you a bit of a snapshot on how we're getting ready to regulate new technology.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rumina. It's so fantastic to hear your perspective, especially sort of building on what we heard from Chris and Caroline about their experiences on the other side of that as developers working with the regulator. And you know, sort of bringing us back up again to sort of the overarching theme of nuclear innovation writ large. So much attention is paid to the design, licensing, and construction of advanced reactors, and rightly so. But I think there is a concern across the sort of nuclear ecosystem that we are at risk of building a bridge to nowhere. And so I want to ask Dan now, what about the rest of the fuel cycle? What challenges lie ahead for providing access to and transporting advanced fuels like HALEU? And how important is it to make sure that we're including the rest of the fuel cycle underneath this larger innovation umbrella as we move forward?
Well, thank you, Jackie. And I want to add to my colleagues, thanks to the Atlantic Council, thanks to the Atlantic Council, not just for this forum, but for their great leadership on energy issues writ large, but nuclear in particular. And also to our hosts in Abu Dhabi. Many of us have met very happily in those past conferences. I think it's something we all look forward to. And hopefully next year, this time, we'll be all in Abu Dhabi celebrating advanced reactors. So I wouldn't say that, you know, fuel is any more important to advanced reactors than, say, gasoline was to the Model T. And I say that obviously tongue in cheek, because to me there is, and you referred to it, Jackie, in your question, an air of surreality around all of this talk. And I love it, the enthusiasm for the advanced technologies. And in fact, you use our little phrase HALEU, was the halo effect. That's high assay low enriched uranium, which is in fact the fuel of choice for these very exciting fourth generation designs that you've heard both Chris and Caroline talk about. And bottom line is there ain't no supply chain whatsoever for it yet. And just to put a finer point on that, of the 10 awardees in the really exciting Advanced Reactor Development Program, 9 of them use this fuel that doesn't exist. And the Model T would not have gotten very far without gasoline, and neither would these reactors. So I was sort of expecting some of my colleagues, when they mentioned the challenges, to say this was one, but I guess they knew that I was here, so I would fill the gap.
That's right, Dan.
Good. Now, in fact, the Nuclear Industry Council has done a survey of the advanced reactor developers, and the question was phrased, what problem keeps you up most at night? And it was, in fact, access to HALEU, high assay low enriched uranium. Now, the good news is that we actually are under contract a little earlier than these ARDP awards in a very exciting project. Within 12 months from today, we will be spinning advanced centrifuge machines in Ohio, which is also a very high unemployment area of the country, speaking of environmental justice. And we will be enriching uranium hexafluoride gas to 19.75% under NRC license. And I have to say, in our experience of our company, Centrus, we have been very happy. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission has been extremely responsive. I don't think they've missed a deadline in terms of the regulatory schedule, which is an aggressive one that we have laid out, notwithstanding the challenges that all of us have been facing with COVID. So that is super exciting for us. But we also face a second valley of death. This is something that the Loan Guarantee Program that I had the privilege to chair the Credit Review Board for during Obama in 2009, 2010, dealt with a similar problem where you had technology mature, solar PV and concentrated solar technologies, but the second valley of death to commercialization had not been traversed. So now look at the ARDP program, just for example, and you've got Chris and others who are going to be deploying in 7 years. We're going to be spinning machines in 2022. The commercial demand is not there yet. How are we going to bridge the gap? Enter public-private partnership again. And it's that's why it's so important and so exciting that both sides of the aisle in Congress and both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue, Jackie, I very much agree with your opening comments to Randy, that the incoming administration has made very clear they're all in on, you don't get to zero electricity with carbon emitting electricity by 2035 without all of the above, including advanced nuclear. So that kind of public-private partnership, not only it can work, but it's worked in the past. In 1956 and 1957, the United States government leveraged its investment in the nuclear Navy to take that technology, Chris knows this as a former Navy nuke, and deployed it with Hyman Rickover leading the development of the shipping port reactor. And maybe a little less known is that Eisenhower made $1 billion in 1956. That was a lot of money worth of nuclear fuel available to launch the commercial nuclear industry. It can work again. And I would add this, and you're going to get into this subject of national security, I know, and nonproliferation a little bit later, Jackie, but there is a national security imperative for the United States of America, which invented enrichment technology, to get back into enrichment technology, because ultimately we will need that to support our nuclear deterrent, because we will need unobligated US uranium from a US plant, such as the one we are building, to create the tritium for the weapons. And we'll also ultimately need highly enriched uranium for our submarines and our carrier reactors. So the United States government has a very strong and compelling national security interest in investing in this. And since, unlike fish and other things, nuclear fuel doesn't go bad in 3 days, the worst thing that could happen is if they invest a little bit earlier than they might otherwise invest, is they'll get the capability a little bit earlier. At the same time, we're using the investment to build up the supply chain and create this very exciting new product. And I would make one last point. Some of our colleagues in the reactor development community have told us about conversations they've had with customers. And it's not an easy case to make to say, I've got a swell reactor, but I can't fuel it for you. So we actually believe that if we could go, and some may have seen that Chris and I did a joint announcement a couple of months ago, if we could go hand in hand to say, not only do we have a reactor for you, but we've got the fuel to make it a sustainable, long-term, carbon-free source of electricity, and one that actually can complement the wider deployment of renewables, we could actually help launch a new bow wave of demand that would help all of us in this advanced reactor industry. And I think we're lucky to have both Caroline and Chris as, you know, absolutely leading proponents in that sector. So I'm very excited about it. And I think that to the point that Randy asked you at the opening about what's it going to be like politically, this is really a rare case in which, as I argue in my last book, we can all agree on what to do in terms of promoting nuclear, even if we don't agree on why. If you don't care about climate change, but you care about national security, you want us to succeed in uranium enrichment. But if you care much more about climate change, you still want us to succeed in uranium enrichment. So hopefully that's where we're going.
Thanks, Dan. This morning, a colleague of mine, Susie Baker, greeted the morning by saying, welcome to the first day of the energy transition as we welcome the Biden administration. And to your point, Dan, as we look to the new Congress and the energy and excitement around finding new ways to lead across the clean energy spectrum, I really do see opportunities for new champions to emerge on issues like HALEU and the development of high-assay low-enriched uranium and some of the other pieces of the fuel cycle for these technologies. So I'm very hopeful as we move forward. I want to kind of pull us out a bit to a bit more of a global view for this conversation. A recent analysis that Third Way completed with an organization called Energy for Growth Hub found that the global electricity demand will more than double by 2050, with this growth almost entirely in emerging markets. And so I'm curious, what can nuclear supplier countries and potential nuclear newcomer countries do right now to prepare for engaging in a safe and secure global advanced nuclear market in the near future? And so I want to give each of you a chance to respond to this, because there's obviously a lot to unpack here from this question. But I want to come back to Rumina first on this point, because you had already sort of started cracking open the door on how important it is to pursue international licensing harmonization. So if you could talk a bit more about that, what's already being done in this space and what you hope to see over the next decade.
Thanks, Jackie. So I've been on this bandwagon for at least the last year and a half. Me and my Chief Regulatory Officer, Ramsey Jamaat, any opportunity we get, we talk about the importance of international harmonization. And it's not that we're promoters of nuclear, that's not our role, or of any technology, but of the fundamental belief that, and if you talk about climate change, and what we're hearing is that nuclear will have to play a part, that many of these new emerging countries want to have a role in that, that you need standard designs that can get deployed readily and easily and safely. And international harmonization, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of smart regulation, and it's a way of doing so. And so for the nuclear sector, and I've had, early on, there was a fair bit of reluctance, partly because I think that may not have been the best of experience in the area of harmonization. There's always this concern around sovereignty, and are we giving up on that if we go down this route? But harmonization is not new in the nuclear sector. When we look at transport regulations, we already do that when it comes to shipping containers. If there is a respected, mature regulator that has certified, other regulators depend on it. I mean, they still do their own due diligence and final licensing, but there is a dependence and acceptance of that. And so I have, as I said, been strongly advocating it, and I believe there's a lot of traction happening in this area. So I want to share a few things on what's happening and where I potentially see this going. I told you about the workshop that the CNSC and the NEA had in December. And a follow-up to that, just last week, the NEA had a workshop where it invited the UK, the USA, and Canada, all the policymakers as well as the regulators, to see, is there a way to get to multilateral licensing, and how would we approach it? And these are three like-minded regulators We've already established ways that we can work together collaboratively. And previous experience has shown that you've got to start small and make sure that it's working before you expand it. And, and then increase the tent and bring others in. And that's just happened last week, and very good progress made there. Also in December, the World Nuclear Association, along with the Can-Do Owners Group, jointly issued a white paper on how industry can support standardization of designs and licensing for SMRs. And so I think those building blocks are coming along. And we know nuclear is a very sophisticated technology. And so for emerging countries, if they can benefit from the expertise, the experience, the infrastructure of mature regulators like the three that I've spoken about, I think that can go a long ways in making these new technologies more readily available and accessible, and frankly, from my perspective, make them safer to deploy. And if whether it's the US NRC or the ONR or the CNSC have endorsed or approved a design, the ultimate licensing, of course, still is up to the country, but it should give other regulators a lot of comfort that a respected regulator has endorsed it. So I see a lot of potential. I'm seeing, I wouldn't have said this a year ago, but where we sit today, I think there is a lot of interest, a lot of leadership being shown in this area. And I think there is growing acceptance that this is what is needed and we can make it happen. And as we learned from other sectors, it's working well there. And we can do this. So maybe it won't happen, but I'm really optimistic that this is the way to go. And for these emerging countries, I think this is an essential ingredient for this to work.
Thanks, Rumina. I couldn't agree more. And you mentioned too, sort of the role of industry in this effort. I want to throw it back to Chris and Caroline real quick for their input on the larger question, but specifically as developers of these technologies. What are your sort of what's your perspective and what are your strategies at this earlier stage as you're moving towards demonstrating first of a kind? How are you already thinking about engaging with some of these countries that have expressed interest in advanced nuclear technologies? And how does working with government, like the regulator and other sort of agencies, factor in? And I guess the other question there that's sort of alluded to is, how's it going at this phase with sort of working with other countries and potentially for yourselves navigating the different government agencies and bureaucracy that sort of exists to sort of navigate that potential process?
You want me to go first, Jackie?
Sure, take it away.
Okay, sure. So, first we have to share our vision, right? Our vision that is, if you think about the world in 2050 or 2060, there's going to be countries that have nuclear energy today who need 2 to 3 times that because of decarbonization and electrification. And then there are many other countries that have no nuclear energy today, but will. And so the choice is it North American or European nuclear technology, or is it Chinese or Russian technology? And so when I talk about U.S. demonstration and the team we formed, for example, which, as Dan mentioned, includes Centrus as well. I mean, we need to solve that problem so that we can sell 100 Natrium reactors around the world. That's why we need HALEU. So when we demonstrate our technology, Natrium, in the U.S., in a way we're repeating the history of the shipping port reactor, because shipping port in the late 50s in Pennsylvania showed the world that a technology that originated in the military could be scaled up for commercial, civil power generation. And when the world saw that, the capital, the private capital flowed into nuclear power, and it resulted in 400 light water reactors, really based on U.S. technology, existing around the world with the great diplomatic and relationships with the that sharing of safety and security standards that really originated with the NRC. So what you see here, in a way, is repeating history, repeating the history of shipping port. This time, the many reactors that we would see in 2050 and 60, there's going to be some big, some small. Caroline's talking about smaller reactors. We're initially starting with 300 megawatt, but there will be new gigawatt scale reactors as well. We absolutely need reactors of all those sizes around the world. So the process, though, it really begins with demonstration. Just like shipping port was so important, there's demonstration. That international regulator cooperation that Rumina mentions, the arrangement between, that she signed with Chairman Spinnicky in the U.S. and the Canadian regulator, the ONR. I know Japan is going to return to nuclear energy. They have great unresolved need for clean, carbon-free energy. They will return to nuclear energy with Gen 4. So it'll start with U.S. demonstration, and then the second wave will be in these very friendly U.S. countries where we have trusted relationships with the regulators, and then yet that the third and fourth waves will be Eastern Europe, where there's great needs for process heat, and then eventually these countries, many near the equator that have zero nuclear energy today. Their electricity demand is going to grow because of, not as much because of electrification, but because of their economies growing in these very warm countries that are inevitably going to need, tremendous amounts of power for environmental control. There's that. That's what we're preparing for. That's what we're preparing for. That's what we started the company for at TerraPower 14 years ago. And I think we've made great progress here in the U.S. and Canada to be staged to repeat the history of shipping port. This time with a slightly different story and different needs for the planet, but we're well poised.
Thanks, Chris. And before we sort of close things out with Dan on sort of the international security and safeguards implications of a global advanced nuclear market, Caroline, what are Oklo's thoughts, especially in really being on the frontier of designing a radically smaller and different design for nuclear? What does export look like for you guys? What's the path forward there?
Yeah. I think actually it was great to follow Rumina talking about, and Chris actually talking about respected regulators and how to work with those. I think it was really telling in some of our interactions with various smaller countries or countries without large developed regulators for nuclear energy. They don't want to feel like a testing platform. They don't want to feel like a test bed. They want to feel like something's been well vetted and that they're getting the top-notch, well-vetted item. And so we've always gone into it with that mindset. I think early on we had people saying like, why don't you go to X small country and they don't have any regulations, so just go there first. And we said, we're going to take the hard way first and then prove it out, and that will really, we believe, open doors elsewhere. So that's been our pathway since early on years ago. And I think part of our goals are to design in, safeguards, safety, and all these kinds of considerations so that it makes it as simple as possible. To really maybe tee it off to Dan here. I mean, just like one of our biggest considerations for scale up and the future, I think, of advanced nuclear, it's also for exports is fuel and how that will be handled. Currently, there's fuel in this range available from Russia. Obviously that and hopefully there's, as Dan scales up, availability from the United States, but export control laws from the United States have sometimes challenged the ability to get technologies out to other countries. So I think there's room for streamlining them, for making them better, and for strengthening our relationships with other countries that we want to help with energy and clean energy specifically.
Thanks, Caroline. Yeah, and you teed up Dan wonderfully, especially, and this is a really important component as we talk about the broader umbrella of innovation over the next 10 years. Dan, I'd love if you could just close us out by talking about the international security and safeguards regimes, how organizations like the IAEA and other organizations will need to be involved. Rumina touched on this a bit. And really opportunities here, for us to make sure that we're incorporating safeguards and security into these new reactors.
Well, it's a great question. And here we are today inaugurating a new president. And I think most historical records now suggest that the fifth greatest president after two Roosevelts, a Lincoln, and a Washington was President Eisenhower. And December 8th, 1953, he set out a vision for how to make this balance, Jackie, that you're asking me about. And it was to share the phenomenal benefits, not only energy, power, electricity, but Chris indicated medical and so forth, of the peaceful use of the atom without creating the weapons threat that we all know is inherent in the technology. And thus was born the International Atomic Energy Agency in 1957 and ultimately the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That system remains fundamentally important, and the IAEA itself retains fundamental importance, and it retains the credibility that it needs to operate in all of these countries. It has provided technical support as well as safety support, as well as just a forum for discussing non-proliferation. I'm old enough to remember 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl and obviously Fukushima. We can't afford another one. We just can't. We just can't. We don't need to if we're smart. And Rumina is so right. Peer review is fundamental. And it's got to be peer review on safety and physical security and safeguards, et cetera, et cetera. But we also need, and I'll wrap up here because I know you got to wrap up the panel, an overarching non-proliferation system. The one that was set up in 1970 in the Non-Proliferation Treaty was good, and it works. We in the United States, I think, sometimes have gotten wrapped around the axle of overachieving and over-bureaucratizing things. We have to be safe. But if we are so safe that we don't sell anything to anyone and we leave the world open to anyone else without the same kind of standards that we have for non-proliferation safety, we haven't done anybody any favors in terms of protecting against proliferation. And oh, by the way, if we fall out of enriching uranium, you're going to promote the promiscuous use of enrichment of uranium, which is actually one of the most dangerous aspects of the fuel cycle. So the United States really, I don't say this in a jingoistic way, we really need to be leaders, not the only leaders, but I am very proud of the non-proliferation laws and regulations that we've promulgated over the years, going back to the NPT, the Non-Proliferation Act of 1978, the Nuclear Suppliers Group, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to continue to be leaders in the field and to help US companies like Oklo and TerraPower not only export, but export safely, and not only for the energy of the world, but for the national security of the world, so that these benefits of the peaceful use of the atom are not accompanied by unacceptable risk of the spread of nuclear weapons.
Thank you so much, Dan. And of course, we could devote an entire panel to just a discussion on the security and safeguards implications and opportunities here. But to close out, I just want to, thank our panel for being here. I feel like we've actually managed to cover quite a bit of ground in the short time that we had, and especially to highlight just how much, and I know I keep using this phrase, the innovation umbrella, but I think that we've reached a point, as I mentioned in my first remarks, where we've really seen rapid progress in the advanced nuclear space. And in the next 10 years, as our panel has instructed us to project out to, there's real opportunity for innovation across the entire nuclear ecosystem, from regulation and international harmonization and licensing, to how we construct and project management improvement for how we build and build again these new designs, certainly in the advanced fuels that we're going to need, and in thinking about how to transport those globally in a global supply chain. And then, of course, in making sure that the advanced nuclear age is truly the most safe and secure that we've ever seen. And so, again, just thank you to the panel. It's been a delight to have this conversation with you all. And I look forward to many more conversations at global energy forums in the years to come, where we can sort of track our projections as we move into the next decade. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Take care.
Thank you.
Jackie, thank you so much. And Chris, Rumina, Dan, Caroline, thank you all again for providing your insights to an Atlanta Council audience. Jackie, one final question for you. What would you say is the key takeaway from this panel that we should take forward to our third panel on nuclear power that we're having later this evening, at the panel on new international opportunities in nuclear energy?
Sure. I mean, I think it's impossible to have a conversation that projects forward and looks at nuclear innovation over the next 10 years without looking at the potential global market for these technologies, and sort of all the opportunities and challenges that present along with that. And so I am personally looking very forward to that panel. But absolutely, for me, it's all about the opportunity. As I mentioned, I think we really are at a pivot point, not only for nuclear technology, but clean energy technology across the board. With incredible opportunities to collaborate internationally more than we ever have before, whether it's on what Rumina talked about largely with international harmonization, also in collaborating with our international organizations like the IAEA from an early stage to make sure that we don't repeat some of the mistakes we've made in the past with nuclear technologies and some of the costs that have come with that. And so I think, as Dan was speaking about, and we were talking about safeguards applications for these reactors, Caroline mentioned that Oklo is already very much involved in a thoughtful process of safeguards by design for their reactor. In the past, we've seen retrofits that have had to be done and sort of back building in safeguards to these reactors at great cost. But now we have opportunities sort of, again, across that nuclear ecosystem to really get it right from the very beginning. And that includes international engagement and really thinking ahead about what a global marketplace for advanced nuclear technology looks like. So again, looking forward to that panel later on.
Jackie, thank you. And we'll make sure that Jennifer Gordon, who's moderating that panel tonight at midnight Eastern time, so really designed for the international audience who will just be waking up in Europe and will have been awake for a while in the Middle East and Asia. They'll make sure she gets that message. We're really looking forward to continuing working with you, Jackie, over the coming months and years on encouraging the development of advanced nuclear. So thank you. That is it for our